Gene Kelly is indisputably a Hollywood legend. A star of such crowd pleasers as Singing in the Rain, DeBerry Was a Lady, An American in Paris, and Ziegfeld Follies. He's done films with the brightest stars, from Fred Astaire to Lucille Ball, Frank Sinatra, Debbie Reynolds, Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland, and the list goes on and on. He even directed our goddess, Barbara Streisand, in Hello, Dolly. Today, we have the honor and pleasure of speaking directly from LA with Patricia Kelly, film historian, biographer, and Gene's widow. Before I start, Patricia, I'm just going to say, I swear when I was getting ready for your interview, I was reading your bio, I teared a bit and had goosebumps for two reasons. One, I got this rush of nostalgia for Hollywood. I'm a huge movie buff, and I love history. And the other was that I can get a sense in your words of your deep respect and love for Gene. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me with you.
How is your day today, and how is LA today?
Well, it's actually, I'm looking out the window here in my office, and it's bright and sunny, which is
sunny. It's snowy here. It's a little sunny, but it's snowy.
Oh, yikes.
Well, welcome to Canada.
People jogging by my window here in shorts. So
Lucky you. Let's start with this. How did you and Gene meet?
Well, that's an interesting story, and it's actually part of my show, but I'll give you a little bit of a teaser on that. It's a very, right now it's very hard for me to even imagine this story because it's kind of hard to believe. I mean, it almost seems more fictional than fact. But I was a very nerdy Herman Melville scholar. I was intent on being the top person in the world, and I was really focused on Melville's creative process, and I would get very excited about a semicolon and spent most of my time in a library in a book with my nose in a book and manuscripts and things. I loved it. It was really detailed, and I was brought on, I had gone to graduate school in the East and was brought on to do a documentary film about Melville in Washington, D.C., and then went on to work on several other projects about American writers, and finally was brought on as a researcher on a film about the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. And the host narrator was to be a guy named Gregory Peck, and I had seen To Kill a Mockingbird, so I knew who that was. At the last minute, they brought on someone named Gene Kelly, and they made me a writer on the project, but I remarkably did not know who Gene Kelly was.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. I really, and as I say, when I look back on it now, it's almost hard to believe, but the great thing about it was that I was forced to get to know the man before I ever loved the guy up on the screen. And now people, usually it's the reverse. They know the guy up on the screen and they don't know much about the man. So he brought me out. We spent this week together working, and I still never knew who he was. But I was enchanted. He was such an erudite gentleman. He was, in my words, I always refer to him as the true Renaissance man. He spoke multiple languages. He very often read a book a day. He was just this immense mind, and I was completely enchanted. Plus, he was terribly handsome. Very, very charming, and the true romantic of the old kind. And so he ultimately ended up bringing me out to California to write his memoir, and ended up marrying me 5 years into that process. So I recorded him in some fashion nearly every day for 10 years, and that's basically the spine of this show that I've created that's been going around the world for over 5 years.
Why am I not surprised he's a gentleman? You could tell from the characters that we've seen on screen.
Well, I'd say gentleman and gentleman, which is really, and a man of great integrity and real decency. And people come out of the theater and they're really glad that he really is what they hope he is. That, and there are a lot of these guys, you know, they may look great up on the screen and you love them as a character, but they're not very nice or they're not very bright. And Gene was both.
Awesome. Gene was known for his energetic and athletic dancing style, his good looks, we talked about that, and the likable characters that he played on screen. As per Wikipedia. That's true. He did have a great smile. I guess I kind of repeated the question here. What drew you personally most to him? One thing, let's say.
Words.
Wow.
It was words. It was really language. That my pet study in graduate school was word origins and etymology and poetry, and those were Gene's pet studies. So we really bonded in the use of language, and I was really passionate about it, and so was he. And so it was this wonderful blending, and you usually don't find a lot of people like Gene. And what's really interesting about him was that it was a very unself-conscious kind of knowledge. A lot of times you'll be with people and you can tell that they're trying to put on airs and show you how much they know. And Gene was... Gene was, I mean, he read Latin, he spoke French, he spoke Italian, he spoke Yiddish, and he would blend these words because he had a real delight in words and the sound of words. So he might blend a phrase, a Yiddish phrase, with a Latin phrase, with a French phrase. But it was not to show you how smart he was. It was because he really delighted in sounds and that you could take a word like a French word like tristesse.
Yeah.
That would convey more than sadness. And so he loved the sense that you could expand your way of expression by choosing words. And so that got me.
That's beautiful. Is there a specific moment of magic of you two being together that you remember fondly?
Oh, there's so many. That's what's nice, and the fact that what's interesting is that not only did I experience those moments, but I also, because it was my job, I wrote them down. And I think a lot of people don't do that. You have in your memory something, but I actually made notes and would jot it down. And so as part of the process of the show and of finishing the memoir, I get to go through the boxes of these notes, and sometimes it just takes your breath away because you'll find a note that is so powerful, but I have his actual words. So it isn't just this incredible memory. I have it in front of me. But I would say, and I actually reference this in the show, that he loved the moon. And he used to wake me up in the middle of the night just to go out on the balcony to see the full moon. And I can still remember the tile on the balcony was a pale blue, a kind of a beautiful blue. And I remember the heat of that on my bare feet and standing with him looking at the moon. And, that I can never look at the moon. I never see the moon without thinking of him, and so that's a pretty constant reference.
That's a beautiful. Thank you for sharing. In your opinion, what was Gene's significant or biggest influence on the making of films?
Well, that's easy because, and he was very specific about how he wished to be remembered. And a lot of people think it was that he wanted to be known for being up in front of the camera. In fact, he wanted to be known for being behind the camera. Oh, okay. And so as a choreographer and as a director, he said he would have just assumed somebody else was up there performing, but there was no one who could really execute a lot of the things that he created. So, but he wanted to be known for changing the look of dance on film and for creating a particularly American style of dance. And that included the costume and the basic style of an American indigenous form that you didn't see before Gene Kelly.
Wow. Wikipedia also says Gene was an American dancer, actor, singer, film director, producer, and choreographer. Did he have a favorite of these parts of making film that he liked more than the other?
It was the creating, it was the directing and choreographing, and that's really what it was tough to be a performer. That was sort of grueling, and you just had to do it and hit your marks and everything, and you had to do it perfectly and execute it. But it was the innovation, the radical things like the blending of live action and animation in Anchors Away with Jerry the Mouse. Yeah. I mean, it was revolutionary. People don't realize that this picture that came out in 1945, I mean, you'd had very primitive blending of live action and animation with Disney, but this was the first time ever that you saw that kind of dance with a live figure. And that now we look back, and with computers and that kind of technology, that's much easier to accomplish. And if you look at things like even the American in Paris ballet, how radical to put a 17.5-minute ballet at the end of your picture, and have a ballet that is dedicated to painters. And then if you look at things like CoverGirl that came out in 1944, where Gene is actually dancing with himself. And again, with a computer, that would be so easy to do. You just double it, but he had to actually do it himself. And so I think that those are the things that he really wanted to be known for, that before Gene, you had a very European tradition of ballroom dancing on polished floors, or you had dance numbers. You'd start the story and then you'd stop the story and do a dance number and then go back and pick it up. Gene wanted the dance to be integrated into the story so that it propels the plot. And Singing in the Rain itself, the iconic number, is probably your best example of that, because what better way to say I'm in love and full of joy than to wave off the cab, kiss the girl, wave off the cab, and then splash and dance in puddles. And so it's movement that is conveying the story and the song. And that, again, if you look prior to Gene, that this is a new thing, and then the masculine, a very athletic form of dance, which was truly American and based on the sports that Gene had played as a boy in Pittsburgh. Okay. So you see the influence of baseball and the influence of hockey. He was a great hockey player, and you see this broad, wide open strokes. The origin is from sports. So, and Gene was a classically trained ballet dancer, Spanish dancer, tap dancer. So it was this great infusion of so many different forms to tell the best story.
While getting ready to dial you, I was actually watching the number of Singing in the Rain repeatedly again and again. And now you saying this is making a lot of sense of the movements and the dance. And it was athletic.
People don't think about it. That's the thing, is that they don't realize Gene was behind the scenes creating this, and that each thing was extremely well thought out. I mean, when with Sing in the Rain, I mean, he's literally taking the dance into the street, and you don't see that before, that he's in numbers, he's roller skating, but this, he's splashing in the puddles and moving towards you and constantly moving at the camera to create this very kinetic sense of energy. And the whole challenge, as Gene said, was that you have dance, which is a three-dimensional art form, and when you put it on film, you lose the third dimension. So he was constantly looking for ways to give a sense of roundness and fullness to the bodies. And one of the things is to create that kinetic sense of dramatic movement at the camera.
See, that's why I love old Hollywood. Speaking of Hollywood, what do you think Gene would say if he was here and I asked him what he thought of Hollywood?
It's a very different world from when he was active in it, and I think even toward the end of his life, he found it almost a foreign land, because instead of when he was here, I mean, there were definitely drawbacks with the big studios. I mean, Gene was basically, as he called it, a slave. He was bought and traded. He had no say in the pictures he could do. If you stopped out from a picture, if you didn't want to do it, you were suspended without pay. Gene got no residuals or royalties for his work because he signed away all the rights to those. So there the studio system had some negative things, but the studio system had some positive things, and that you had everyone under one roof. So you had at MGM, you had the costume people, the musicians, the composers, the writers, Gene, directors, choreographers, all under one roof. So they would all work together, and economically it was feasible. It was like a repertory company. Then, and as Gene said, even though the studio heads were often quite tricky and sometimes difficult, they basically loved movies. They were movie people. Whereas now you have conglomerates. You have a lot of, you have companies that own the movie companies. They're business people. It was a business
sign.
Yeah, and it was a business then. It was definitely run as a business, but I think there was a passion for the people there. Now you have, big conglomerates owning them and dictating, and you don't have all the same people under one roof. And I think that makes it very, very difficult to get that same sense. So, and as Gene, people, even at the end of his life, he would be brought in to talk about projects, and the people had no sense of the history of the movies and no sense of his contribution. And I think there was a real sense of kind of ageism that somebody in his 80s might not have a good concept, whereas Gene was always way ahead of his time and so extraordinary. And I think that's why his work still resonates so much today. He's still cool, and he's still the go-to guy for everybody.
I had a second part of the question, but I think you kind of answered it. What about you? What are your thoughts on Hollywood?
Well, I don't have a lot to do with it in a sense. I mean, I'm kind of on the periphery. I get to enjoy it. I just got to enjoy it with the cast and crew of La La Land.
I was going to ask you about the movie, but I didn't know if we want to bring it up or not.
Well,
what would Gene have thought of the movie? Let's ask that.
He would have cheered for it. He would have loved. Yeah, he would have loved. I mean, these are tremendous young people working, and in many ways, Damien Chazelle, the director, has created a kind of repertory company. He brings in the same cinematographer, musicians, and for that picture, he rented a space out in the valley and put everybody under one roof, so that everyone, the dancers were there, the choreographer, and they would get together and meet and look at movies and talk about things. And so he has such reverence for that period and understands what makes it work. And so my only regret is that I wish Gene were here to have them. I think it would be a great apprenticeship, because
I can't imagine.
I mean, I think you get somebody like Damien and Justin Hurwitz and Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. You get these people that are craving for knowledge and really respectful of knowledge. And I got pretty teary watching it. It wasn't so much,
making me teary.
but it wasn't so much the movie itself, which is very compelling.
What I was getting out of it is imagining what those people felt trying to replicate something that felt like the old days.
Replicate and go beyond.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Which is what Gene always wanted. Don't do what I did, but take it and create something new. But I felt his absence. Watching it, I really felt his absence more than, and just wished he were there to talk to them, because they're like sponges, and he was like a sponge. And that's the thing, is that he looked to other people and absorbed everything. And that's what I saw with this group, that they came to the archives here to see Gene's things, and they saw his annotated script for Singing in the Rain and the choreography for Singing in the Rain, and so I just wanted him to be here to meet with him too.
Speaking of Singing in the Rain, I don't know if you've answered this. I must have seen Singing in the Rain about 100 times. Who hasn't, really? A lot. Do you know of any particular memory of Gene of making this movie, other than the choreography of the scene that we talked about?
Well, there's so many. One thing he talked about was the great innovation, and he always thought Donald O'Connor was one of the most unsung heroes, that he was one of the greatest improvisational comedians of all time. And so what Gene talked about, he said that he thought that the Moses Supposes number, where the two are dancing, that Gene thought that was the best tap number that he ever did on film. And he talked about the scene where they have the diction coach, and Donald is making the funny faces. Well, that was all improvisation by Donald, and they started shooting the scene, and Donald starts making these funny faces, and Gene started cracking up, and that then became part of the number, and it's an extraordinary piece. And so when you see the little touches, and if you watch, I've seen it so many times now, and I introduce it all around the world, but now I see something different. And now when you watch when they're first introduced and Gene is giving the always dignity speech, if you look over at Donald, he's rolling his eyes, and it's just very, the interaction is so charming. And there's so many things about it. I mean, Gene there's so much mythology about the making of the movie, but it is true that he was very ill when they shot the classic Sing in the Rain scene. He had
really? Okay.
Yeah, he had a temperature of about 103, and so I went on the road for the 60th anniversary of Sing in the Rain with the great Rita Moreno, and she has the small role of Zelda, but a terrific role, and she said she went on the set every day to watch it being filmed, and even if she wasn't in it, and she said Gene was in constant motion. He's either behind the camera, in front of the camera, then back behind the camera, and he would go behind the camera, set the shots, set the lights, and go change into his costume, go shoot the number, and then he would go outside. It was a set, was all draped in black tarpaulin. He would go outside and then bake the fever out of him lying on the sidewalk, and then go back in. And so it was shot in a day and a half, but you would never know he was sick doing that.
Not at all. Okay, we're gonna switch to something here. I hope you don't mind. We asked viewers and readers of our media to send in some questions, and we selected some of them to ask you.
Great.
Artist and local queer personality Mark Terra asks, how did Gene get his start in Hollywood?
Gene, it was actually, a lot of people saw him on Broadway and saw him in things like Tell Joey and wanted him to come out. They actually saw him before that, and they kept trying to get him to come out, and he didn't feel like he was ready. But after he starred in Tell Joey, he decided he was ready to come out, and it was David O. Selznick who brought him out. So, and then Selznick ended up selling Gene to MGM. That's what they did. He was owned.
Yeah.
He was bartered and traded and sold, and the money didn't go to Gene. It went to Selznick, or MGM would loan him out, and it goes. So it's, and really, it was brought out and then loaned to do the first picture was with Judy Garland, and Judy had seen Gene on Broadway and loved him and wanted him to star. Credited her. He always said that she was really the guiding light for him and the reason that he was in the movies, because she taught him everything, he said, about performing in front of a camera, which is very different from performing on stage. And he said she was the brightest woman in Hollywood, and interestingly, he also thought she was the sexiest woman, which surprises people because she was often referred to in the papers as the ugly duckling. And
interesting. So this question comes from Haley James, co-founder of Hope Honoring Original Performers Everywhere and owner of Twinkle Toes Dance Studio, studio of dance and performing arts. Who was Gene's favorite person to work with? She asks.
Gene was always, he was asked that all the time. Who's your favorite dancing partner? And unlike Astaire, who had specific partners, Gene always chose the person for the particular role. So didn't really have a favorite, because he had Leslie Caron in American in Paris, Debbie Reynolds in Sing in the Rain. They're not interchangeable. You can't move them around. And so he always selected, he had no constant partner. He selected the people to play opposite, and so I think he did say that he thought Vera Ellen was the best all-around dancer, and but the public didn't really buy her as a romantic lead. The public always dictates. Jean always said the public chooses, and they happen to like Jean. I mean, Jean, it's maybe not too surprising, but a lot of the actors didn't read well with the public, but they were terrific dancers or terrific performers. But Jean was kind of lucky. He was, as he said, the camera was very kind to him.
We have a comment here, not a question, from one of our community's fabulous drag artists, Amanda Roberts. She says, Jean was my first crush. I'm sure you had a lot of competition on that front, huh?
Well, and I always say, when I do my show, I greet people before they come as they come in the door. And so I'm out there an hour before the show starts, shaking hands and talking to people. And I say after the show as well, because for me, it isn't a show. Like, it's an experience. It's the minute you come into that theater, it begins there. And so it starts with people coming up and saying to me either, oh my God, I love your husband. I had such a crush on him. And the number of men and women who say that to me, it's, I figure by the time I get up on that stage, we've got a really good chance of a warm show, because I always say, the line forms right here. But and thank you for that, because he was so exceptional. So I love it when people say that. I just find it really
flattering.
Well, he was extraordinary, and not only on the screen but in person. And so I think these crushes are very well placed.
A question from personal trainer Lorenzo Pernota. Did Jean have any career regrets?
It's interesting. It's not even career regrets. Well, I'll tell you two things. One thing that I have in the show is a little note that I found that he's asked himself about regrets, and he answers the question. Oh. And so I'm going to tell everybody to come to the show.
Come to the show. You can't tell you everything.
Because you'll be very surprised at the personal regrets. And but one thing that a professional regret is that one role that he really wanted was to be Sky Masterson in Guys and Dolls.
Oh, yeah.
And he actually said it's the only role I begged to do. He went to New York, and Samuel Goldwyn wanted Jean for the role, but MGM wouldn't release him to do it. So it was a little political battle with the studios, and so you get Marlon Brando instead of Gene Kelly in that. And that really was
what would have been if he was.
I mean, nothing against Marlon Brando, but Gene would have, and Frank, and I mean, it just would have been extraordinary.
This is a comment from artist John Wraith. He says, I worked with Mr. Kelly in the 70s. I taught his daughter Bridget how to dance. Oh, sorry, to skate.
He taught Bridget how to skate?
Yeah.
Oh.
I don't know if you know him.
I don't know, and I mean, Gene was an exquisite skater and actually skated with Dorothy Hamill in a special that was shot up in Toronto, and he was just a beautiful hockey player, wanted to be a professional hockey player, but there was no team in Pittsburgh at that time. Okay. And a gorgeous figure skater and a wonderful roller skater. He would skate up and down in front of the house on Rodeo Drive. He just had any form of movement like that, and particularly that kind of skating. So no, that's interesting. I didn't know.
This comes from Pratt Grant, a writer, social butterfly, and dance enthusiast. She says, he is my childhood hero. Can I ask two questions? First, what was it like for Patricia to dance with him when they were out socially? And the second is, did he have a favorite pair of dance shoes? The dancing question is, I answer the question in the show because people always ask
assume I'm a dancer, number one, and then they ask about dancing with Gene. And I'll just give you a little bit of that. There's a little, I don't want to take away completely, and I don't mean this to all be a teaser, but
Oh, please.
Gene would not dance in public
Wow.
because the minute he stood up, the entire room wanted to dance with him. So that became it was an interesting thing about my learning to dance and dancing with him. So they have to come and then they'll hear the story about that. And then, what was the second part? It was,
Did he have a favorite pair of dancing shoes?
favorite dancing shoes. His dancing shoes were crafted, they were specially made of a very supple leather and by a special guy. And they were made so that they look like a man's loafer, and yet they're so supple that he could bend his toe like a ballet slipper. So he was always looking to create the longest line of the dance, so the leanest, longest line like classical ballet, but still look like a guy who's on the street. And so when you see them, but watch things like American Paris, Sing in the Rain, you'll see him point his toe.
Yeah.
You can't do that in a regular flat loafer, but he could do it in these. So they were those very specially made shoes.
You know, I'm going to go going watching all those movies again.
And this is also, again, for those of you who like Converse tennis shoes, you'll see a little nod to Converse tennis shoes in the show.
Interesting. All right. That concludes the audience questions. Let's talk about the show. We've been mentioning the show. What is the name of the show?
It's called Gene Kelly, The Legacy, and it's kind of a hybrid. People always ask me, what is it? And it's hard to describe because I don't get up and sing and dance. We let Gene do all of that. You'll be very happy. I let him get there. What it is someone has described it as kind of a memoir on stage. I created it for what would have been his 100th birthday in 2012. And the Academy of Motion Pictures always does a tribute to the legends for their 100th. And since Gene was so specific about how he wanted to be remembered, I asked them if I could create this, and they really, I'm still astonished and grateful that they allowed me to do this. And it was to show Gene as the creative artist. And so what I do is, I always say it's like a Disneyland ride. It's like an e-ticket, and you get in this little boat with me, and you go on this journey and you wind around and you don't really know where you're headed, but you go through this process, and at the end it's a transformative process. I think not only an intellectual process but an emotional process. And what I do is I have these brilliant film clips on a very big screen, and then I weave these stories that Gene shared with me over our decade together between the clips, so people get a sense of what he was thinking when he did it and why, and the kind of behind-the-scenes story. And then also, Gene used to sing to me at night. That was often how he would reveal some of the most intimate parts of his life. And it would be, if he got too close to the bone in what he was talking about, he would kind of revert to song lyrics and songs. And so I have these extraordinary recordings of him that take you deeper into him. And then I really go into the end of his life and the aftermath, how you deal with loss and grief and how you deal with a legacy. And I literally unpack some of his belongings on stage. And so people come out and they go, God, I loved him before. I love him even more now. They get a sense of the dimensions of the man. They have no idea of the breadth of his knowledge and the magnitude of his brain. And I think a lot of people will come out and they'll say they're glad that he is what he is because they want to like him, and they really, the fact that he spoke all these languages and read a book a day and was an economics major, I think they come out with this more rounded sense of him. And so, and as I say, then I stay after and shake hands with people and we chat. So it's a very,
interact?
Yeah, it's all extemporaneous. It changes every night. So the film clips are the same, but I weave the stories differently. And so I listen to the audience and the reactions, and I can take it this way or move it this way. And so it is, for me, is a very collaborative experience.
I'm just thinking now that makes you. That I don't think you intended yourself to be a performer, but this sounds like a performance piece for you.
Well, I grew up, I'm a writer, but I was also a public speaker growing up. Okay. And I think it was a kind of melding of these two. But yes, it is as I say, I'm not singing and dancing, but I am interacting. And it's funny, I sit on stools at the side of the stage, so I'm watching the clips with the audience, and a lot of times I'll be looking at them, and I get so absorbed in it, I like, oh shoot, and get back on the stage. But I love it so much. I mean, I would do it every night if I could, because I hear the audience respond. I hear the laughter. I hear the communal laughter, and I hear communal tears, and I hear people responding. They'll see Sid Charisse up on stage, and they'll comment about it, and it's just. It is a full experience. It's an evening experience, and as I say, I get so much out of it. People comment about what they get out of it, but I get so much, and I think it was a way of beginning to deal with the loss and the grief, because what I hear back from people is extraordinary and very, very moving.
You said tears, so there's emotional moments in the show.
Well, yes. Yes, I mean, and it's
somebody's life. So
it's a life. It's a life. And you really get inside that life, and you get inside that emotional life, I think, of someone with this vision. You see, Gene is this real visionary, and what he set out to do and what he created and the contribution he made, and then the heart that he had. And I mean, I have the notes that he left for me the day we got married. I have the Valentines that he would sprinkle all around the house for Valentine's Day. And I think people just don't, very often you see a celebrity, but you don't think of them as writing out little Valentines, and you don't see them leaving little notes around and hear the notes. And so, and I have letters that are very important and say a lot. So it's but again, how do you describe it? I mean, I try to describe it to people, but I say, just trust, come and see it, and I promise that there's something that it's an experience that, there's no demographic for the show, so there's no, people assume it's going to skew.
Somebody older would relate to him, or no?
No, they think it's going to be old, and there's no. It's half men, it's half women, and I have a 3-year-old he's now come twice. He came at 2.5, and he's come at 3.5. I had a 7-year-old. He's now 9, and he's been 4 times.
Wow.
And so I say it's really 7 years old to 97, and there's nothing it doesn't touch. It's because young people get him. He's cool, and he's relevant, and his choreography is still what everybody is learning to. So Strictly Come Dancing, or Dancing with the Stars, or So You Think You Can Dance, or everybody on Broadway. He's the model. Everybody in the classical ballets. I mean, you've got the ballet of Canada. You've got all these people were influenced by him.
When did you start doing the show? When did you start going on the road?
2012.
2012. How long did it take to develop? Was it challenging to get all the material and everything together?
Well, I always say that I wrote it overnight, which is hilarious, because it's like, I did literally conceive it and write it overnight. But that's an overnight with 20 years behind it, of this was my work. This is, not only was I a spouse, I was working on
things.
Story. And so it had always, and Gene, as I said, was so specific. I had the gift that he was very specific about how he wanted to be remembered. So he presented that to me, and he said, if anybody's going to do it, it's going to be you. And so I always felt like I had the marching orders and I had the materials. And so crafting it was not the difficult thing. And I just came back. I just did it in Switzerland, Luxembourg, Sweden.
Wow.
So he's universally loved, and that's really fun. And it's a universal language too, which is interesting. The films resonate around the world.
And you're coming to Toronto next for a fundraiser?
Yes, and I can't wait because.
What do we know about them? They're a homeless. They're a shelter for homeless youth.
Yes, and I visited when I was there last, and it was a really moving experience, because I think it's so easy to kind of ignore that side of things, that you can kind of walk past it, or we just figure young people aren't on the streets and don't need help for some odd reason. And I was there, and the kids were really lovely and gathered around, and they were playing word games. Coincidentally, they were kind of playing this game of charades that Gene used to play in his house on Rodeo Drive, and it was really fun to see that how many years later, 60 years later, young people were still doing some of the same things that he did with people like Judy Garland. And I think when I saw the materials that they gather to give to young people, just clothing, things to keep warm, basic foodstuffs, basic things to to maintain the dignity of young people, which I think is so important, that you don't treat them as less than. And it's one thing that I've experienced when I go around and speak in a lot of schools, and I speak, and I've heard people say, well, you really have to dumb things down for young people. And I don't know what young people they're hanging around, but not the young people I'm around, because in fact, if you talk to them and you relate to them as individuals, they're so receptive, and again, so looking for, they're again like sponges. And so, and in fact, it was young people's questions and young people's openness and non-maliciousness in their questions that helped me to begin to deal with the grief, and to begin to deal with the loss of Gene, and to begin to define what this show and experience would be. So I credit the young people, and so if I'm hopeful that this will get people to focus more on what is a really important thing in Toronto. It's obviously a global issue, but Toronto and Kennedy House is doing such a superb job with this effort in getting people safe, getting them clothed and beds and educated and with integrity. And so I really hope not only that people will join me for this performance, but it's kind of a win-win.
Speaking my language, youth and homeless is very dear to my heart. We really have to care. We can't just and I try to include youth in everything in our media, because they're the future.
They are, and that's what I don't understand. And I've been on panels with people, and they say with filmmaking, you need to, as I say, they say you need to dumb it down. And I've taken these same clips around the world and been to schools, and the young people get it. They'll go, wait, there are no cuts in there. It's not about chopped up body parts that you see. And I'll say, no, watch. the cut is on the turn, so you don't notice it. Gene was very conscious of how he edited things, and it's usually one camera head on shooting the dance full figure, and so you don't betray the dance, and you don't shoot it at odd angles or just show a hand or feet dancing. And the kids are absorbed. I mean, they have. People will say, "Oh, they have no attention span." Oh, they have a.
That's not true. You know what? You have to give them the chance. I'll just share with you. I had a 19-year-old young woman came up to my office and said, "Can you make me the editor-in-chief of your magazine?" I said, "You've got the guts to say that. Sit down here and tell me why you think you can do it." And she became probably the youngest editor-in-chief of a magazine in Durham, where I have one of the magazines. So, you know what? Without giving them the chance, you're not going to discover how wonderful they are.
It's exactly, and I think that this notion of an attention span, I think they have a great attention span. I mean, my show runs 2 hours and 20 minutes, and the kids have come and come again. And so I think that if you give them great material, I think it's our fault, is that
absolutely.
It's on us to give them something that's worth their time, because otherwise, why waste their time? Why? They are the future. So I feel like we have a responsibility to engage with them. It's a really, I think this is, and I love that we're blending these two things for this in Toronto. I think it's a real privilege for me, and I was very happy that they reached out to me about it.
So you've been here to Toronto before?
I have. I was just there in November, and it was interesting.
Like our city.
I liked it very much, and I came actually the day after our election, so I didn't feel like traveling that day, and I felt just numb, but actually to come to Toronto, I felt like I was in the right place, because I was at a conference where the first thing that they did was open the conference with a reflection on Indigenous people, and that the people who had been there 12,000 years before and 8,000 years before. And then they opened with an acknowledgement of diversity, and then it was,
we need these days.
Exactly, and then it was with an appreciation for the arts and the contribution and the essentialness of the humanities and and all art forms to create a culture and art, and to really acknowledge our humanity. And so oddly, I spent this week there in a kind of cocoon of all the things that I certainly feel strongly about, that Jean felt very strongly about. And so it was kind of the right place to be. It was just hard to come back.
Well, I'm going to ask you this. I took that out of a question from one of the readers, because I didn't think that we want to touch on this. What do you think Jean would have said of the political climate right now?
Well, Jean was a very left-wing liberal Democrat, but more than even politically motivated, Jean was humanitarian. He was just it references the decency, the integrity. He was a guy who also was a guy who looked out for the underdog, because he had been the underdog. I mean, he was an Irish Catholic growing up in the Depression in a lower middle class family. So his father, who had sold Columbia graphophones, basically door-to-door salesman, the epitome of death of a salesman. He loses his job, and the family is broken apart in a sense because of this economic situation. And then Jean, the Catholics were at that time a very discriminated against group, so that people often forget about the fact that the Klan was burning crosses on the hillsides in Pittsburgh in 1928 for Al Smith running for president. So Jean, as an Irish Catholic, Irish were on the bottom of the totem pole, so he was an outsider, and he always felt like he was invited to things, but he was often invited just as the toy boy to perform, not because he was there for his mind. And I think he always felt this kind of, he couldn't join a fraternity when he went to college because they didn't allow Catholics. And he was able to enter one Catholic fraternity and befriended the kids in the Jewish fraternity. And so this sense of being an outcast that kind of fueled his style of dancing, that he didn't want to dance like rich people. He wanted to create something that reflected his upbringing and who he was. And so I think Gene always felt, he never lost that sense of, he never took anything for granted. He always knew that if you could be up here, but you could very quickly be down here. He'd always root for the teams that were the underdogs. You know, he never rooted for the richest team. He would root for the guys under. And so I think with all of the women's rights, LGBTQ rights, all of the basic human rights that we're looking at just being eviscerated, I always, you know, I miss Gene every minute of every day, but I'm not sure that he could handle what's happening right now. I think it would be so devastating to him and heartbreaking. I mean, he had trouble with the Bushes and with Reagan. So this focus on wealth, when you have billionaires running things, that's just would be just completely abhorrent to Gene. The inequity in that you have so many people here and so many people here unable to make ends meet. It would crush his heart. I really, it would not be an environment for him. So we hope we can do better and we can keep
You will. There's a lot of great, strong spirit in the USA, and you're going to come out of this.
Well, unfortunately, you have a guy up there who's at least can do quantum physics. I mean, Gene would have loved Justin, and I think that's they would have been very much like-minded on many things. So, I think that's one of the reasons this story. When I was up in Canada, I said, gosh, here I am pitching these shows about Gene, and I feel like maybe the climate isn't right for that. And somebody said to me there, they said, no, the climate is just right.
That's the message.
That's what he said. He said, Gene Kelly represents the best of who we are. And so I kind of felt, okay, that's it.
You're making me love the guy so much more. So
yeah, you better come to the show. I
will. Bring some of these. How do they get tickets? When is the show? And yeah,
the show is on March 23rd at 8 p.m. Okay. And it is at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre in Toronto. Okay. And so people can go on the website and for Kennedy House and click on that for tickets. And I'll be posting things on Facebook also, so people can go on Gene Kelly, The Legacy on Facebook. And
so you have a page on Facebook? Okay.
And I'll post the things about that and the link to it. But bring some of these young people. That's what I think. Bring the 19-year-olds and because they love it and they'll get a lot out of it, even if they don't know who he is. And that's fine, because obviously I didn't know who he was, and I got up to speed. But I think the story is really so much bigger. It is about who we are and our humanity, and this striving for excellence, that you don't settle for here, you go for here, and that's what is.
I'll put a message out to my young peeps.
Yeah, please do. Please.
Patricia, it's been a pleasure. I'm honored. And thank you for your time. Thank you so much for sharing with us the life of a legend, and thank you for all the hard work that you've been doing to preserve that legacy and that life. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. It's to be able to promote, and it would go on without me, but it's such a joy to be able to be part of it. And thank you for having me. This is great.
Have a wonderful afternoon in LA.
Well, I wish you were here to enjoy it, but next time. Okay, bye-bye.